The Soweto Ministers Fraternal is an interdenominational fraternal that unites churches and organizations in Soweto and beyond. We are, by our constitutional mandate, an all-volunteer organization working collectively to serving God and communities through the generous donation of time and efforts given by our members. Our vision is to become the Christian leaders working collectively to bring a spiritual and physical transformation to our communities by the power of Christ Jesus through the church. Our purpose is to provide information, encouragement, and assistance to Bible-believing churches, fellowships, and individuals. Preserve our Christian heritage through exposure of, opposition to, and separation from doctrinal impurity and compromise in current religious trends and movements. To protect churches from religious and political restrictions, subtle or obvious, that would hinder their ministries for Christ. In the 2017 report of the CRL Rights Commission on the state of religion in South Africa has created palpable consternation within the Christian community. The Commission's findings and recommendations are contained in its report of the hearings on the commercialization of religion and abuse of people's beliefs systems. The Commission recommended the regulation of religious communities in South Africa to curb the commercialization of religion and the abuse of people's beliefs systems after carrying out its extensive investigation. In 2019, the Soweto Ministers Fraternal held several consultative dialogues on the CRL Commission Church Regulation proposal. Like the rest of South Africa populace, the Soweto Ministers Fraternal is also concerned by the seemingly rampant abuses on our people in the name of Christianity and or religion. We have engaged with several religious organizations in trying to find solutions to this potentially damaging phenomenon that has found expression in some of the churches. While we agree that outright government regulation has the potential to obscure the separation of church and state doctrine, we however concede that some form of management of churches needs to be put in place. We also concede that total self-regulation or no regulation at all in its current form has not worked so far. In fact, we would go so far as stating that whatever measures are currently in place to combat rogue pastors and churches have been ineffective, to say the least. Whether we like it or not, the church needs to come up with an effective solution to combat these rogue churches running the risk of government putting in place measures to regulate it. The following were noted from those dialogues we held as the Soweto Ministers Fraternal. Soweto Ministers Fraternal noted concerns that the CRL Rights Commission's recommendations do not directly deal with the root causes of the violations of human rights in religion. The South African Constitution does not give a proper clarification of the reservations or limitations of religious liberties. The Soweto Ministers Fraternal is concerned that the Section 15.1 of the South African Constitution merely defines religious liberties as the right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion, without spelling out what ought to happen when these provisions infringe on human rights. Some arguments that came during our consultation were based on the regulation of religion in South Africa on the constitutional protection of human rights. The Soweto Ministers Fraternal concur that there is merit in these arguments. However, it is noted that the reported abuses of congregants in Pentecostal and charismatic churches emanate from religious dogmas spiritual and prophetic revelations as mentioned in the CRL Commissions in 2017, as well as certain interpretations of biblical texts and theological positions. This sets the Constitution and the Bible into collision. Secondly, those who accept the CRL Rights Commission's recommendation for the regulation of religion need to be reminded of many biblical examples of committed believers for whom the religious context are more authoritative than the laws of the land. If you read Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 to 18, or Acts chapter 4, verse 18 to 20. Likewise, objectors to the Commission's call for the regulation of religion base their objections on the Constitution's guaranteeing of religious freedom. For instance, they argue that the Constitution guarantees and protects freedom of religion in South Africa. Therefore, adopting a proposal of the CRL's Commission will be unconstitutional, wrong, and a serious offense against freedom of religion, and a clear attempt of the state to control religions and churches in South Africa. In agreement, the Soweto Ministers Fraternal urges that while some extend the purposes that the Commission seeks to achieve by its proposals are admirable, it is surely cannot be claimed that they, meaning the purposes, are so important as to warrant the wholesale violation of rights that would be involved. Thus, the proposals of the commissions are rejected based on the premise that the Constitution gives freedom of religion. Other concerned voices see the Commission's proposal to regulate religion as infringement on the freedom of worship. To the Soweto Ministers Fraternal, no one, including the state, has the right to decide which religions qualify as a religion or to sit as a judge over the doctrines of religious institutions and decide whether they can operate or not. The Commission's proposals are rejected on the firm belief that religious communities in South Africa have a right and freedom to believe, teach, preach, and live out our religious convictions and beliefs without the control or interference of the state. The Commission has not distinguished criminality and freedom of religion. Overall, it would have been preferable for the Commission to have brought a few test cases before the courts rather than devoting its efforts to inventing a vast structure of control and oversight which, if it should come into being, will fail entirely to distinguish between genuine churches and those that are merely masquerades as such. Thus, the Commission's proposals are rejected on the basis of poor distinction between genuine churches and those masquerading as truly religious. It can thus be argued that there are already laws in place to deal with criminal elements masquerading expressions of freedom of religion, and there is no need to make new laws. In summary, the various people base their acceptance or rejection of the Commission's proposals on the Constitution. Those who accept the Commission's recommendation base it on the Constitution's protection of human rights and human dignity, which they find grossly violated by the churches. Those who reject the regulation of religion appeal to the Constitution provision of freedom of religion, while others say instead of granting laws that will burden all religious societies, the Commission should identify the elements of criminality and hand them to the police. There is evidence of commercialization of religion in South Africa. The evidence includes spiritual leaders demanding substantial amounts of money from their congregants before praying for them and blessing them, the selling of water and oil to congregants at exorbitant prices, spiritual leaders demanding people to pay money before they can see them. Religious institutions are not complying with the existing appropriate laws of the land, as reflected by non-compliance to various stipulated registration requirements, including non-compliance with the tax laws of South Africa. Some religious institutions are operating without good governance structures, such as codes of conduct, church councils, and disciplinary committees. In some cases, there were churches controlled and owned by one person. Finance committees constituted of the spiritual leader, his wife, and close associates. There is also misuse of visa application system by religious leaders. According to the report by the Commission, some pastors apply for different type of visa, like a visitor's visa or temporary visa, but then demand a permanent or resident visa once in the country. Churches in South Africa have mushroomed because it is easier to establish churches in the country than in any other African countries. There is a lack of religious peer review mechanism in the religious sector, allowing spiritual leaders to do as they please because there is no system of accountability, leading to occurrences of pastors commanding their congregants to eat grass, snakes, rats, drink petrol, and putting congregants into deep freezers. In conclusion, the Soweto ministers Fraternal foresee three main problems of regulating religion as proposed by the CRL Rights Commission. Number one, regulating religion will be disempowering to the poor. Number two, it will create conditions for religious persecution. Number three, forcing religious movements to operate underground if for some reason their registration is not provided. The Soweto Ministers Fraternal concludes that religious communities must resist the Commission's efforts to regulate religion because its secular humanistic understanding of religion attempts to redefine religion in ways that are unhelpful to religious communities. However, rather than being hostile, religious communities must graciously challenge the CRL Rights Commission to protect the freedom of religion by working with religious communities to distinguish authentic religious practitioners from religious imposters who should be reported to the police and face the wrath of justice. It is necessary that people, churches, and religions must take responsibility to protect their freedom of religion. If they do not do that, the state and its organs will take over and define the boundaries of religion. I thank you.